Hello world and welcome to F1 Help with your host Lazarus, which is me, and with the Formula 1 season just around the corner, I've decided to get like this introductory video in which I'm going to explain to you how does a Formula 1 weekend work. How does the entirety of it work? This is going to be a two-part video. First, i.e. this part, is going to tackle everything that happens in the build-up to the race. So then, without any further ado, let's get straight into the first part, which is Thursday. But actually not much is done on a Thursday. The teams and drivers simply arrive on the track sometime on Tuesday in order to prepare for the upcoming days. Now, the actual action, if you will, begins on Friday morning, where drivers and team bosses will have a media conference, which will last for about 2 hours. So once this media conference has come to an end, they will only then, take to the track 2 hours after the media conference for what is known as free practice. Now, for free practice, there are 3 sessions. First one is held right after the aforementioned press conference on a Friday morning. Each of these sessions will last for 1 hour, and they just serve for the drivers to get a little bit more familiarized with the track, to see where they can gain time, to see how the car feels like, to just judge the track on its own, how the car performs in general. The second free practice session is held 2 hours after the first one on Friday afternoon. Now, for these practice sessions, teams are not required, if you will, to bring their main drivers, their regular drivers of the season. They can also employ their test, reserve or junior drivers for them to get a little bit more experience and mileage in a Formula 1 car, because every official Formula 1 test will get those drivers a super license point, of which they need 40 if they are to even compete in a Formula 1 race. So the third free practice session is held on a Saturday, and it serves exactly the same purpose as the previous two, to get familiarized with the track, but also they can practice starts for the race, for example. Each track has a designated area where drivers can stop and practice the start. Just count down in their mind and everything else, have a little practice light, and then wham, away they go. After the Saturday free practice session has been completed, on Saturday afternoon we will be greeted with qualifying. Qualifying in Formula 1 serves one very simple purpose, and that is to determine the starting order for the race. Naturally, every driver would prefer to start the race in the best possible position, which, in case of Formula 1 or any other motorsport for that matter, is called a pole position. The pole position is simply put the first starting position on the grid, meaning the entire field is behind you. You can leave everyone behind as you are starting the race. And of course, then every driver, in accordance with their fastest times, are then lined accordingly behind the pole position winner, or pole sitter as they are known in Formula 1. So, before one driver can begin their timed lap, if you will, they first need to exit the pits, do what is called an out lap. It's a slow lap which serves the purpose of just getting heat into the brakes and tire, for example, and to get drivers prepared in the best possible way to start the said timed lap, which is known as a hot lap. Hot lap, of course, is the lap that is timed, and hot lap is the lap that counts towards the driver's result in qualifying. Once they have crossed the line and completed their hot lap, there is what is known as an in lap. In lap is simply if they're going back to the pit lane. So they will stay off the racing line, go as slowly as possible, try not to get in the way of other drivers as well. So as the drivers are doing the hot lap, you will normally see some colors that are, beneath their name and time. And those colors simply indicate how fast the driver is going. So then, let's then take, for example, the current qualifying format, which has been in power since 2006. in which the qualifying is split into 3 sessions, each aptly named qualifying 1, qualifying 2, and qualifying 3. Naturally, qualifying 1 is the first of these sessions to begin. It lasts for 18 minutes, and as there currently are 20 drivers on the grid, all 20 of them are allowed to take to the track at any moment to try and set as competitive lap time as they can. So, if, let's say, a driver has a red symbol underneath their name, that means that their lap is slow and they will most likely be eliminated. Now, in qualifying 1, 5 slowest drivers are eliminated and cannot take any further part in qualifying. Right above the red time is the yellow time, which means that time is nothing special. It's decent or even the same as a previous driver. Above the yellow is the green time, which is like a driver's personal best for any given time. And of course, then we have the purple, which signifies that it's the fastest lap. Now, every lap is divided into 3 sectors. One sector is literally just 1/3 of the racetrack. So if a driver is setting like a purple sector after purple sector, that means they're probably in a good position to go to the pole position, but usually it's determined as to, for example, the driver has set 2 purple sectors and 1 green sector. It just then comes down to what driver has the best individual sectors as well, in order to determine when they cross the line, of course, to see who the fastest is. Usually this is quite easy to spot. If a driver is setting purple sector after purple sector, high chances are they're going to the pole position. So, once qualifying 1 has been completed and 5 slowest drivers have been eliminated, which of course means that starting positions from 16th to 20th are set for the race. Then the session will move on to qualifying 2, or Q2. Q2 is the same as qualifying 1. One difference being that it lasts 15 minutes rather than 18 minutes. And again, 5 slowest drivers are eliminated. Now, what's interesting about Q2 is that the drivers who did not get eliminated, so the 10 drivers who advanced from qualifying 2, are required to start the race on the exact same set of tire that they used to set their fastest lap in qualifying 2. Of course, once the qualifying 2 has been completed, the 10 remaining drivers will then move on to qualifying 3 or Q3 and just duke it out for the pole position. Fastest driver gets, of course, the pole position. So, but what happens, for example, if somebody has, you have seen somebody qualify 7th, but come race day, you suddenly see them in 12th or even lower. That is probably because the driver in question has incurred a penalty. And how penalties work, I will explain in a couple of seconds. So the most common type of penalty is a 3 or 5 place grid penalty. It can be more, but usually 3 or 5 are the preferred one. Now, penalties can also be carried over, if you will, or earned in free practice. Most common reason for a driver to receive a penalty is to impede another driver, in a sense to affect their hot lap. So if a driver is currently on a hot lap setting the track on fire and then just stumbles on a slower driver, if the driver doesn't get out of the way soon enough, if he stays a little bit longer, then they will incur a penalty. This is a little bit inconsistent, if you will, because in Formula 1 there is this thing called tow, which means that a car in front will like punch a hole into the air, which will then allow the car behind to have less resistance, less air resistance, and therefore provide with more grip and downforce, in turn getting quicker. So drivers will usually tend to stick to the slower car because of this tow, and sometimes the driver in front cannot exactly judge what the driver behind, how long he wants to be in the tow, and cannot react accordingly. Other type of penalty is relating again to a grid position. Teams can sometimes, between the qualifying and the race or during free practice, change a component on the car, engine component or a gearbox component. Now, that in itself is fine. Teams actually have several, I think 5 components to change without incurring a penalty, but if they go over those 5 components, each subsequent component will net them 5 grid drops, if you will. 5 per component. So if they change 2, they will get 10 positions taken away. So that's why if you saw somebody qualify 7th or let's say 5th, but starting in 12th or 10th, they most likely incurred a grid penalty. It is possible for a driver to be completely disqualified from qualifying. This is usually done due to a technical infringement or, let's say, unsportsmanlike behavior. Technical infringement in terms that a team has an illegal part on the car, for example. Or if a driver has caused a collision with another driver as well, that can also give them a disqualification from the qualifying session in total. Now, there is one more type of penalty which doesn't result in a driver getting a grid position drop, but rather just have their lap time invalidated. Lap times are invalidated when a driver exceeds track limits. Track limits are just 2 white lines on each side of the track, and if a driver goes with all 4 wheels across that white line, that is considered as exceeding track limits. Lap time is invalidated. If there is enough time left in the session, they can set another lap time. If not, that's it. Speaking of penalties, grid penalties, instead of taking the penalty as it is and starting from the back of the grid, teams can sometimes opt to start the race from the pit lane. If they feel that maybe they need the car needs a little bit more work, or if they just want to make sure that the car is in one piece when the race has begun, they will then opt to start that driver or drivers, plural, from the pit lane. But those who start from the pit lane are then not allowed to take part in the formation lap, which we'll get to later. So they'll have to wait for the actual race start until every car has passed the pit exit, and only then are they allowed to go full speed. One of the most epic pit lane starts was performed in 2012 by Sebastian Vettel in his Red Bull days. He started from the pit lane and ended up finishing the race in third position. Back then there were 24 cars on the grid. Just let that sink in for a moment. While it sinks in, there is one more rule which is not frequently used but still exists in Formula 1, which is called the 107% rule. So while it's sinking in, we'll explain the 107% rule. So 107% rule on its surface may seem like a simple thing, and it kinda is, but depending on how you understand things. For example, 107% rule means that if a driver isn't within a certain time of the fastest driver in qualifying 1, they will not be allowed to start the race. So that fastest time is 100%, and they need to be within additional 7% in order to be eligible for a race start. Now, this rule isn't frequent. It's actually been, avoided, abused. It's been ignored a couple of times as well. The last time it happened, well, ironically, was again in 2012. When, for the Australian Grand Prix, Lewis Hamilton, who was then driving for McLaren, set a lap time of 1:24.9, I think. Yeah, 1:24.9. But then the two drivers for the HRT or Hispania racing team, Pedro de la Rosa and Narayan Karthikeyan, both set a time of that was like around 1:33. So like 9 seconds slower than Hamilton. And they were in turn not allowed to start the race. For comparison, the actual last qualified car was a Marussia Schalpic, who set a time of 1:31. So he was within that 107% rule. He was given the all clear. De La Rosa and Karthikeyan were not. And it has 2 times it has happened, because this rule was reintroduced, if you will, in 2011. And both times, ironically, it was the Hispania racing team who got at the other end of the stick regarding the 107% rule. Now, why is this rule so ignored, if you will, or so circumnavigated in some ways? Is because there are other factors to consider when letting or not letting a driver start. For example, if a qualifying session began in dry conditions and then it started to rain, and some drivers maybe were not able to get out and set a time before the rain came, this counts as an external circumstance, and of course the times in wet being much slower than times in dry, they will definitely not be within 107% rule, so they will be allowed to start the race. Alternatively, a driver may have been impeded on their hot lap and unable to set a regular time, in which case again the stewards will look the other way because of the impediment and let them start the race. And needless to say, if a car has suffered a mechanical failure, if a driver has crashed out and was not able to set a time, in which case the stewards will most likely look into their free practice times to see if they were anything close to being competitive, and if they are, you're good to go. No problems, no questions asked, you're allowed to race. Now, like I said, the fastest driver in qualifying 3 will get the pole position. Now, depending on which event we are, that pole position may also be for the sprint race. So a sprint race is something that has only recently been introduced in Formula 1, more specifically in 2021. And a sprint race is exactly what it is. It's a race. However, it's 1/3 of a racing distance, so let's say around 100 kilometers, in which the drivers can still find, ways to gain or even lose positions. Now, the sprint race, the drivers will actually be eligible to score points. First 8 drivers, as it is in 2022. First place driver will score 8 points, and then so on and so forth until the 8th placed one, who will score 1 solitary point. The sprint racing is not something that's actually beloved by many Formula 1 fans, and to an extent I can see why it is. It is not that it's so beloved, but in sprint races, in that case luckily, are not present at every single event. There currently are 3 confirmed events with the sprint race, which are going to be the San Marino Emilia Romagna Grand Prix in Autodromo Enzo Edino Ferrari in Imola, Italy. Then we have Spielberg, Red Bull Ring in Austria, if you will, and then we have the Brazilian Grand Prix, which is held at the Autodromo José Carlos Pache, or as it is most commonly known as Interlagos in São Paulo. And for these races, like I said, drivers are still eligible to, gain and or lose positions. For example, if a driver started the sprint race on pole, but then fell, let's say, to 3rd, in the actual race, they will be starting 3rd. They will still be classified as a pole sitter for the race, but they will start 3rd because of their sprint race result. Similarly, if a driver has retired from the race, they will also have to start from the back of the grid or from the pit lane. So, that has been pretty much the build-up to a Formula 1 race. In the next part, of course, I will explain how does a Formula 1 race work, along with some rules and some examples for penalties and stuff like that. So, if you enjoy this kind of video, if you think this is a good introduction to the world of YouTube, please feel free to like and subscribe. Leave a comment, of course. If I made any mistakes, feel free to point them out. I guess that I did. We're all human. Humans err. To err is human. So what can you do? This has been Lazarus from App1 Help, and until next time, I bid you farewell.